The film begins by showing one of the prisons in the United States. Inside the prison, a senior inmate named Dwight is seen getting ready because today is his day of freedom. For 25 years, Dwight has been incarcerated for the massacre of a gangster group he once committed. Additionally, he was the right-hand man of the biggest mafia boss in the United States named Pete. Shortly after, Dwight is finally released from prison, and he immediately heads to Pete's headquarters. As Dwight no longer has a family after his wife and daughter chose to leave him since he entered prison. On the way, Dwight can only marvel at the sight of the city, which has become very modern. In fact, Dwight even feels strange when he sees electric bikes, because none of these things existed before he went to prison. Sometime later, Dwight arrives at Pete's headquarters, and he is immediately invited in. At that moment, Pete is now very old and in poor health. Shortly after, Pete's son named Charles appears and explains to Dwight that all of his father's businesses have now been taken over by Charles, as Pete is very old now. Charles also has a new right-hand man named Vince, so it's impossible for him to hire Dwight as his right-hand man. However, Charles still respects Dwight's sacrifice of being imprisoned for 25 years, so he intends to send Dwight to a remote city named Tulsa. In that city, he must be able to control the city and collect taxes from all the drug dealers to be handed over to Charles. Upon hearing this, Dwight refuses because indirectly he would have to start everything from scratch again. When seeing Dwight's disrespectful attitude, Vince rises and kicks him out. But Dwight quickly knocks Vince unconscious. After that, Pete apologizes to Dwight and explains that everything has changed and is not like it used to be in his time. Pete asks Dwight to just obey all of Charles's orders because the most important thing is that Dwight still has a job and won't be unemployed. Upon hearing this, Dwight relented and agreed to be placed in the city of Tulsa. Not long after, Dwight arrived in Tulsa and immediately hailed a taxi to go to the apartment that would be his new home. At that moment, he struck up a conversation with a taxi driver named Tyson. During the journey, they continued chatting because Tyson was very pleasant and friendly. After that, Dwight accidentally noticed a coffee shop with a cannabis leaf logo on its door, and he promptly asked Tyson about the shop. Tyson explained that it was indeed a coffee shop, but they also sold marijuana there. Upon hearing this, Dwight asked Tyson to wait outside while he went in to meet the owner of the shop. Once inside, Dwight politely asked one of the employees to call their boss. However, the employee refused and even kicked him out because the shop didn't welcome strangers. Calmly, Dwight walked out and grabbed a thermos from Tyson's taxi, then re-entered and confronted the patrons. Eventually, the owner of the shop, named Bodie, heard the commotion and hurried outside. At that moment, Dwight immediately invited Bodie to have a private conversation, where he explained that he was the right-hand man of the largest mafia group in the United States, now led by Charles, and his task in Tulsa was to collect taxes from all the drug dealers, including Bodie. Apparently, they all had to pay 20% of their weekly earnings, and in return, Dwight would provide protection from gangsters, FBI, or any applicable law. Having no choice, Bodie eventually agreed to comply with what Dwight said and immediately paid 20% tax on the total of all his earnings for this week. After that, Dwight returned to the taxi and offered Tyson to become his personal driver, with a quite high payment. Without hesitation, he immediately accepted the offer, thus officially becoming Dwight's personal driver from now on. After that, Tyson drove Dwight to his apartment. That night, Dwight went to one of the nightclubs in Tulsa, where he approached several visitors and also the club owner named Keller. He did all of this to get acquainted with local people who would later be recruited as his subordinates. The next day, Dwight and Tyson returned to Bodie's coffee shop. Dwight then asked where Bodie got the marijuana leaves he always sold. Hearing this, Bodie answered that he got the leaves from a farmer acquaintance named Jimmy, who was the one who supplied all the marijuana leaves in the city because he had dozens of hectares of marijuana plantations. Upon hearing this, Dwight asked to be introduced to Jimmy. Sometime later, Dwight returned to Keller's nightclub. This time, he met a woman named Anna and they introduced themselves. Anna wasn't alone at that time, as she was partying with her friends at the nightclub. After that, Dwight was invited to join them, and they partied together. After the party, it turned out that Dwight was interested in Anna, so he invited her to spend the night at his apartment. Coincidentally, she was also interested in Dwight and accepted the invitation. The next morning, Anna and Dwight were seen waking up from their sleep. After that, Anna quickly said goodbye because she had to work. Before parting ways, Dwight expressed hope that they could meet again. Sometime later, the FBI team in Tulsa was seen having a meeting. At that moment, they were discussing about Dwight, who had been a convict for 25 years. The FBI knew that Dwight now lived in Tulsa, and they were worried he might cause trouble again. In that meeting, Anna was also present, as it turned out she was an FBI agent. At that moment, she was very surprised to learn that Dwight was a former convict who had just finished serving a 25-year sentence. The following day, Anna was still curious about Dwight, so she immediately contacted her colleague at the FBI to inquire about detailed information regarding Dwight. Anna's colleague then informed her that Dwight used to be the right-hand man of the biggest mafia boss in New York City, namely Pete. Additionally, Dwight was notorious for being very cruel to anyone who crossed him. After learning this bit of information, Anna thanked her colleague and ended the call. Meanwhile, Charles was visited by Vince, where he demanded accountability because the blow from Dwight yesterday had caused severe damage to his jaw. Realizing that Dwight was his father's former top lieutenant, Charles decided to discuss this matter with his father first. On the other hand, Dwight and Tyson were visiting Bodie to collect the weekly taxes, where he also asked Bodie to take him to Jimmy, the farmer who supplied the marijuana leaves. Unfortunately, Bodie was busy at the moment and promised to take Dwight later when he was free. 2 hours later, Dwight received a call from Charles, who requested Dwight to pay $50,000 as compensation for Vince, whom he had hit hard yesterday. Fortunately, Dwight agreed and asked Charles to deduct the compensation from his salary. In the afternoon, when Dwight was at his apartment, he was suddenly visited by Anna. At that moment, Dwight didn't know that she was an FBI agent. While Anna visited Dwight, she asked the reason he stayed in Tulsa. Dwight then explained that he was just on vacation, enjoying his retirement. Not wanting to raise suspicion, Anna advised Dwight to be careful because there were many bad people in the city. Sometime later, Dwight was being driven by Bodie to meet Jimmy. Upon arrival, Dwight was warmly welcomed by Jimmy. At that moment, he offered a collaboration with Jimmy, where he would distribute all the harvest throughout Tulsa. Dwight also promised to provide Jimmy with protection from anything if he agreed to work with him. Eventually, Jimmy agreed, and from now on, they officially worked together. The following day, Dwight opened his laptop to search for the whereabouts of his wife and daughter, who had left him a long time ago. Shortly after, Dwight managed to find his daughter's address from social media. Moreover, Dwight also obtained her phone number and immediately called the number. When connected, Dwight quickly apologized and expressed how much he missed his daughter. However, her daughter immediately hung up upon realizing it was her father calling. At that moment, Dwight could only fall silent, his heart shattered, as his daughter seemed to no longer want his presence. On the other hand, Anna and other FBI teams were currently surrounding the house of a terrorist. The FBI team asked the terrorist to surrender, promising to mitigate his punishment. However, the terrorist refused to come out and instead detonated his own house. After that, the terrorist died in the explosion. Meanwhile, Dwight and Tyson were collecting taxes at Bodie's coffee shop. At that moment, Dwight became curious because the shop was unusually crowded today. Dwight then went to the back to meet Bodie and asked why the coffee shop was so busy. Bodie explained that they were hosting a party featuring a new variant of drug made from nitrous oxide gas. The product was deemed safe as it was inhaled using balloons, making it less likely to attract police suspicion. Upon learning this, Dwight had an idea to sell the product at a music concert to earn more money. He also promised to contribute to the capital to buy the product, as long as the profits were split equally. Eventually, Bodie accepted Dwight's proposal. However, they needed to plan their strategy before proceeding. That night, Dwight went to Keller's nightclub and persuaded Keller to join him in selling the new drug variant at the upcoming music concert. He offered to pay Keller double if he agreed to join. In the end, Keller immediately accepted Dwight's offer. The next day, Dwight went to renew his driver's license as his previous one had expired. But as he was taking the driving test on the highway, suddenly he was attacked by an unknown car. Quickly, Dwight pursued despite his instructor being shot. Unfortunately, the shooter managed to escape his pursuit. Shortly after, Dwight was taken to the police station for interrogation regarding the recent incident. The police suspected Dwight of causing trouble again, considering he was the former right-hand man of Pete. the biggest mafia boss in America. However, Dwight swore he hadn't done anything wrong, and in that incident, he asserted that he was a victim. But the police, not easily convinced, still detained him. 2 hours later, Anna visited Dwight, who was surprised to learn that she was an FBI agent. However, Anna asked Dwight to stay calm as she was there to free him. Eventually, with her help, Dwight was released. As a gesture of gratitude, Dwight invited Anna to dinner. During dinner, Dwight recounted his past to Anna, including being a former convict and Pete's right-hand man, while she just smiled, as she already knew everything. Afterward, Dwight invited Anna back to his apartment, and they enjoying their intimate moment. The following day, Dwight contacted Charles and told him about the attack yesterday. He suspected the attacker was Vince, seeking revenge. However, Charles stated that Vince never strayed far from him, so it could be confirmed that the attacker was not Vince. After that, Dwight went to the hospital to visit the driving instructor who had been shot yesterday. Dwight immediately handed an envelope containing money to the instructor, asking him to trace the license plate of the car that attacked them. Although the instructor's wounds were not fully healed, because he had been given an envelope of money, the instructor agreed to trace the license plate and would contact Dwight when the results were available. Sometime later, the instructor had provided the address of the car used in the shooting to Dwight, so he and Tyson immediately went to that address. However, upon arrival, Dwight only found yesterday's car burned out. After that, he searched inside the car until he accidentally found a torn piece of fabric with a ranch logo from Tulsa. Quickly, Dwight immediately went to the location of the ranch because he was certain that the person who attacked him yesterday was the owner of that ranch. Upon arrival, Dwight chose to stay in the car, waiting for the ranch owner to return. After waiting for quite some time, the ranch owner finally returned, prompting Dwight to follow the owner's car from behind. When the ranch owner arrived home, Dwight prepared to get out. However, Dwight hesitated when he saw the ranch owner's child warmly welcoming his father with a hug. In the end, Dwight decided to come back the next morning, waiting for a more opportune moment. The next day, the ranch owner named Armand was seen resumed his activities. As he was entering the home, Dwight suddenly approached from behind and pointed a gun at him. Dwight demanded to know why Armand had attacked him yesterday and on whose orders. Hearing this, Armand apologized, saying he suspected Dwight came to Tulsa to hunt him down on Charles's orders. Dwight, surprised, asked if there was an issue between Armand and Charles. Eventually, Armand explained that while Dwight was in prison, he had worked for Charles. Moreover, Armand knew the crucial secret that led to Dwight's 25-year imprisonment was a trap set by Charles. Therefore, Armand believed Dwight was sent to this city to eliminate him before finally revealing this to him. Hearing this, Dwight was shocked to learn that Charles was the mastermind behind his imprisonment. However, he chose not to act because he still respected Pete. Afterward, Dwight promised not to attack Armand as long as he agreed to join him as a subordinate. With no other choice, Armand eventually agreed to Dwight's request. That night, the new variant of drugs that Dwight had ordered earlier arrived at Bodie's coffee shop. After that, Dwight immediately instructed Tyson and Bodie to sell them at a music concert nearby. Quickly, Tyson and Bodie immediately began selling the new variant of the product. While they were busy selling, they were suddenly approached by a group of local gangsters who proceeded to beat up Tyson and Bodie and confiscated all their merchandise. 1 hour later, Bodie and Tyson reported the recent events to Dwight, who was at Keller's club at the time. Upon hearing this, Dwight was furious and promised to retaliate the next night. He also persuaded Keller to join because Keller had agreed to cooperate with him the previous day. At the same time, Dwight contacted Armand to invite him to attack the gangsters the next night as well. The next day, Tyson was being treated by his mother. His father, named Mark, witnessed this and was displeased. He then asked who had beaten him up, and Tyson explained that he was attacked by a group of gangsters at the music concert, but assured his father that Dwight as his boss would retaliate that night. At night, Dwight and Keller were seen waiting for the others to arrive to seek revenge on the local gangster group. Shortly after, Bodie, Tyson, and Armand began to arrive, prompting Dwight to decide to leave immediately. However, just as they were about to leave, Mark arrived, where he expressed his desire to also beat up those who had harmed Tyson. Hearing this, Dwight gladly accepted Mark's participation. Upon reaching the music concert venue, Dwight immediately armed all his men with baseball bats. After that, Dwight and his men stormed the gangsters' headquarters and launched a brutal attack. After a lengthy battle, Dwight's group finally managed to defeat the gangsters. Dwight also brought along the new variant of drugs they had seized yesterday, along with all the money at the local gangsters' headquarters. Afterwards, Dwight and his men returned to Keller's club and evenly distributed all the seized money among their members, including Mark. 2 days later, one of the gang members who was attacked by Dwight yesterday reported the assault to the police. The gang member also provided the license plate number of one of Dwight's henchmen and requested the police to arrest him. Unexpectedly, most of the police in Tulsa were submissive to the gangster, so they would obey everything the gangster ordered. On the other hand, Tyson was seen driving alone while talking to his girlfriend on the phone. However, he was suddenly stopped by the police earlier because the license plate given by the gang member turned out to be Tyson's car license plate. Quickly, the police immediately arrested Tyson and took him to the station. Upon arrival, Tyson tried to contact Dwight for help, but unfortunately, his number was inactive, so Tyson had to be detained temporarily at the police station. That night, one of the police officers confiscated Tyson's phone and unlocked it. From the phone, the officer managed to track down Bodie's whereabouts. The next day, Tyson was released, but the police still planned to seize his phone. Meanwhile, Bodie had also apparently been apprehended by other police officers. On the other hand, Charles was currently in the hospital because his father had slipped into a coma. Charles then contacted Dwight and asked him to come to the hospital in New York. Despite being angry with Charles for trapping him in the past, Dwight would still go there out of respect for Pete. Meanwhile, Armand was at his ranch, where one of his employees had heard that Armand and Dwight had attacked the gangster headquarters at the music concert. The gangsters were known as Black Macadam, and the employee warned Armand not to deal with the Black Macadam group again because they had a very cruel leader named Waltrip and had long dominated the city of Tulsa. So far, no one dared to disturb them, except for Dwight and Armand yesterday. Feeling curious about his employee's words, Armand immediately went home to find out about the Black Macadam gangster boss, Waltrip, through the internet. Unexpectedly, what his employee said turned out to be true because information from the internet also explained that Waltrip, the leader of the Black Macadam gangsters, was extremely cruel, immune to the law, and had a vast number of troops. Learning this, Armand became somewhat afraid that his wife and child would become targets of these gangsters. At the same time, Dwight had just arrived at the New York hospital to visit Pete. However, he received a less than warm welcome from Vince, and they almost came to fight. Luckily, Charles managed to intervene and immediately took Dwight to Pete's room. However, Pete was sound asleep, so Dwight decided to leave and come back later. Meanwhile, Bodie, who was previously arrested by the police, was now handed over to Waltrip. Bodie was then threatened with elimination if he did not provide details about who Dwight was and why he had settled in Tulsa. Feeling scared, Bodie eventually explained that Dwight was sent by the New York mafia boss named Charles. His purpose there was to take over Tulsa and collect taxes from every dealer in the city. Hearing this, Bodie promised never to let it happen because the only one who could rule Tulsa was himself. After that, Waltrip ordered 2 corrupt police officers who were his henchmen to take Bodie home because he no longer needed him, returning to Dwight, who was still in New York City. At that moment, he suddenly remembered his daughter who lived in New York, so Dwight took the time to look for her address first. Not long after, Dwight managed to reach the address and went straight to his daughter, who was selling flowers at the time. Seeing her father arrive, Dwight's daughter, known as Tina, immediately acted coldly and asked why he approached her. Dwight immediately apologized because Tina and her mother had been left alone due to his 25-year imprisonment. At that moment, Dwight also promised not to repeat such actions again, as long as Tina would accept him as her father. Tina finally explained that she didn't actually hate him but was traumatized because one of Charles's henchmen had harassed her. As a result, Tina chose to have no dealings with the mafia, including her own father. Dwight was furious upon hearing this and immediately asked who had done it. He also asked why Tina hadn't told him earlier. Tina then answered that the person was Nico, who was one of Charles's henchmen. Tina didn't get a chance to tell Dwight because the day after the incident, he was suddenly arrested and imprisoned. In the end, Dwight understood why Charles had framed him and sent him to prison was to cover up this case. Unable to contain his emotions any longer, Dwight quickly went to Charles's headquarters to find Nico. Upon arrival, Dwight saw Nico playing cards with some friends, including Charles and Vince. However, he no longer cared and brutally attacked Nico until he was dead. Seeing this, Charles could only stay silent, realizing that fighting against Dwight would require more than just 3 people. After that, Dwight calmly left without saying a word to Charles. A few days later, Charles complained to his father about Dwight who had killed Nico. However, Pete, knowing that Nico had harassed Dwight's daughter, considered it fair, so there was nothing to be questioned. However, Charles still insisted on wanting to eliminate Dwight because he had dared to eliminate his best henchman. Hearing this, Pete became angry and suddenly slapped Charles. Then he said that Dwight was his best right-hand man of all time, whom he considered as his own brother. Therefore, Pete reminded Charles never to dare to attack Dwight again if he still wanted to be considered his son. At that moment, Charles could only stay silent, holding back his pin-up anger. Before Dwight returned to Tulsa, he visited Tina again and told her that Nico had been taken care of and now everything was settled. Tina then asked why Dwight had done that, knowing it would only create new problems. Dwight asserted that he did it out of love for Tina and he didn't care even if he would be hunted by Charles later because he couldn't bear to see his daughter hurt by others. Hearing this, Tina's heart instantly softened, and from now on, she also realized how much her father loved her. Shortly after, Dwight had arrived in Tulsa and was immediately picked up by Tyson. He then recounted how he and Bodie had been arrested by the police for attacking the Black Macadam gangsters over the past 2 days. Tyson had also tried to contact Dwight several times, but his number was inactive. Hearing this, he immediately apologized because he had used a new phone number while in New York. After that, Dwight asked Tyson to take him to Keller's club to discuss this issue more seriously. Upon arrival, Dwight asked Keller if he knew about Tyson and Bodie being arrested by the police yesterday. Keller then replied that he knew, and it was all Waltrip's orders, the leader of the Black Macadam gang. Furthermore, Bodie was kidnapped and interrogated by Waltrip. Learning this information, Dwight asked Keller to arrange a meeting with Waltrip. Shortly after, Dwight and Keller met with Waltrip. At that moment, Dwight asked why Waltrip had arrested Tyson and Bodie when his gangsters had attacked first at the music concert. Waltrip replied that he didn't like others distributing drugs in his territory because he ruled the Tulsa area. So if Dwight still wanted to distribute those goods, he had to submit to him first. Upon hearing this, Dwight refused because no one could command him except Pete. In the end, they both became increasingly heated, and Waltrip immediately kicked Dwight out of his place. On the other hand, Tina was seen washing dishes. After that, she heard the sound of her home phone ringing. But when answered, the caller suddenly threatened her safety along with her child and husband. Hearing this, Tina panicked and immediately contacted Dwight and recounted the recent incident. Tina worried that the mysterious caller might be Charles, who was upset because Dwight had taken care of his henchmen. However, Dwight asked her to remain calm because he would immediately find out about the mysterious caller. Quickly, Dwight contacted one of Charles's henchmen named Goody, then asked who had threatened Tina over the phone. Goody said he didn't know, but he would try to find out. In the past, Goody was a close friend of Dwight before he went to prison. Dwight also asked Goody to come to Tulsa because there was something important they needed to discuss. But Goody replied that he would ask for permission from Charles or Pete. An hour later, Goody was seen asking for permission to go to Tulsa from Charles. However, he did not allow it because he was afraid Dwight would trap Goody. Unlike Charles, Pete immediately asked Goody to order a ticket to comply with everything Dwight ordered. Pete was sure that Dwight wouldn't do anything strange if not disturbed. In the end, Goody immediately packed to go to Tulsa. On the other hand, Dwight was seen chatting with Keller, where he suggested that Keller expand his nightclub and Dwight would invest there too. But in the middle of the conversation, suddenly, a man attacked them. After shooting at each other for a while, Dwight and Keller managed to take out the man. When seen up close, he turned out to be a member of the Black Macadam gang commanded by Waltrip. Realizing this, Dwight was very angry, and it seemed like the war between them would soon begin. On the other hand, Tina was about to enter the supermarket with her child, while her husband chose to wait outside. Not long after, her husband was suddenly beaten by someone until he was badly injured. and it turned out that the person who beat her husband was Charles, because he still harbored a grudge against Dwight for eliminating Nico, his best henchman. Meanwhile, Dwight and Keller were seen burying the body of the Black Macadam gang member who had attacked them earlier. But before burying the body, Dwight instructed Keller to open the jacket of the deceased to be sent to Waltrip. A few hours later, Waltrip was seen at the headquarters. Not long after, one of his female henchmen arrived with a box. She said she found the box in front of the door. When opened, it turned out to be the jacket belonging to one of his henchmen. Waltrip became angry and promised to attack Dwight with a larger force. On the other hand, Tina was now in the hospital. Due to the attack by Charles, her husband was severely injured and now had to be hospitalized. Tina contacted Dwight and told him everything. Dwight suggested that she should move to Tulsa, as New York seemed unsafe for her family. Eventually, Tina agreed to move to Tulsa after her husband had somewhat recovered. On another note, Goody was now arriving in Tulsa as requested by Dwight. Dwight then immediately asked who attacked his son-in-law because he had been assaulted the previous night. Hearing this, Goody swore that he didn't know, as he was busy arranging his ticket to come to Tulsa. After that, Dwight was evidently convinced that it was the work of Charles or his henchmen, so he promised that someday he would eliminate Charles. After that, Dwight invited Goody to join his group, as he was his friend from the past, and that was why Dwight had asked him to come here. However, Goody said he would think about it first. Sometime later, Goody was seen contacting Charles and informed him that Dwight was furious due to the attack on his son-in-law. If the attack was indeed carried out by Charles, then Goody suggested that he should apologize rather than risk a war later on. However, Charles refused, stating that he would never apologize to Dwight. Afterward, Charles then approached his father, who was taking a bath. He pretended to assist Pete in cleaning his head. However, Charles suddenly drowned his father in the bathtub until he died. He did all of this because he wanted to fully seize power and replace Pete. Charles also harbored deep resentment towards his father for always siding with Dwight. With Pete's death, Charles was now free to do whatever he pleased, including eliminating Dwight. The next day, many people visited Charles's house to mourn Pete's death. It was noticeable that Charles's hair had been shaved bald. Apparently, Charles fabricated a story, telling everyone that his father died from a heart attack. Meanwhile, Goody, still in Tulsa, promptly informed Dwight about Pete's passing. Upon hearing the news, Dwight was saddened as he had come to regard Pete as his own brother. However, Dwight apologized, stating that he couldn't pay his respects there because he still didn't want to see Charles's face. After that, Goody bid farewell as he needed to attend Pete's funeral. Several days later, Dwight and his team were seen training new recruits, where Dwight intentionally recruited more people as a precaution in case Waltrip, the gangster leader, or Charles, the New York mafia boss, suddenly attacked him. Following this, Dwight asked Keller to find even more new recruits to join them. He responded that he would promptly find the people Dwight wanted. On the other hand, Anna was in a meeting with her superiors. They were discussing Waltrip, the leader of the Black Macadam gang, who always seemed immune to the law. Even most of the police in Tulsa were subservient to him. Therefore, the FBI team had to move quickly to apprehend Waltrip. Meanwhile, at Charles's house, there were still many guests mourning his father's death. Afterward, Charles gathered Pete's senior henchmen, including Goody, to discuss something. At that moment, he announced that he now held full power in place of Pete. He also fabricated another story, claiming that Pete had suffered a heart attack due to Dwight's actions, so they all had to hunt him down. However, one senior henchman replied that Dwight was no ordinary person, and his abilities should not be underestimated. Pete even considered Dwight as a brother, so it was unlikely they would hunt him down. Hearing this, Charles became furious and immediately choked the man. Charles reiterated that he was now their boss, so they all had to obey what he commanded. On the other hand, Keller was introducing two new members to Dwight. He explained that they were both skilled in hand-to-hand combat and firearms because they were former U.S. military personnel. Knowing this, Dwight was pleased and immediately accepted both of them. The next day, Anna and the FBI team were seen raiding Waltrip's headquarters. Unfortunately, Waltrip was not there, so Anna could only capture some of his henchmen. Additionally, she managed to retrieve Waltrip's laptop containing crucial data. From the laptop, Anna learned about all of Waltrip's illegal businesses, including arms trading, drug trafficking, and human trafficking. Elsewhere, one of Waltrip's corrupt police henchmen was contacting him to inform that their place had been raided by Anna and the FBI team. Hearing this, Waltrip became furious and vowed to hunt her down. Meanwhile, Dwight was suddenly contacted by Charles. At that moment, Charles apologized for his previous actions and invited Dwight to strengthen their relationship as before. He also would come to Tulsa in a few days and hoped that Dwight would meet him. Upon hearing that, Dwight agreed to all of Charles's requests. However, Charles's intention in inviting Dwight to meet was simply to trap him so that he could easily eliminate him. However, Charles was also unaware that Dwight now had many troops and had nearly taken control of Tulsa. That night, Dwight was visited by Anna, where she told him that she and the FBI team had raided Waltrip's headquarters. Unfortunately, Waltrip wasn't there. Before Anna could tell everything, Waltrip suddenly arrived and attacked them both, resulting in Anna getting shot while Waltrip escaped. Dwight, who was unharmed, immediately took Anna to the hospital. The next day, Dwight was seen being interrogated by the FBI regarding Anna's shooting by Waltrip. The FBI suspected that Dwight had colluded with Waltrip to eliminate Anna. However, Dwight stated that he couldn't possibly do that because she was his close friend. However, the FBI didn't want to believe that easily and still intended to detain Dwight. Shortly after, Dwight's lawyer arrived and argued with the FBI, as it was clear that Dwight wasn't involved. Eventually, Dwight was released. The next day, Dwight went to the hospital to check on Anna's condition. At that moment, he stated that he would eliminate Waltrip and his remaining gangsters. However, Anna replied that it was possible Waltrip had already left Tulsa with all his illegal business profits. Anna also mentioned that after recovering, she would likely be fired from the FBI because the FBI had learned about her relationship with Dwight. Anna explained that FBI agents were strictly forbidden from having any relationship with mafia members or ex-convicts. Therefore, she was likely to be dismissed. Upon hearing this, Dwight reassured Anna to stay calm because even if she was fired from the FBI, he promised to ensure her well-being. After leaving the hospital, Dwight went to meet Armand at his home, where Armand mentioned that Charles was on his way to Tulsa and would likely arrive by tomorrow morning. Knowing this, Dwight asked Armand to mobilize all his members to welcome Charles's arrival. The next day showed Charles, Vince, and Goody relaxing as they had just arrived in Tulsa. Shortly after, Dwight, Armand, and Tyson appeared and approached Charles. Initially, Charles thought that Dwight would welcome him warmly. However, Dwight instead said that he had established his own mafia group and didn't want anything to do with him. Dwight also warned Charles not to mess around, especially with his family. After that, Dwight invited Goody to join his group instead. Goody, who was a longtime friend of Dwight, eventually chose to join him. Seeing this, Charles instantly became furious because his initial intention of coming here was to eliminate Dwight, but now he found himself cornered. When Charles was about to fight back, Dwight calmly stated that this place was surrounded by his men ready to shoot him anytime. Eventually, Charles and Vince chose to leave rather than die in the hands of Dwight's group. Elsewhere, Waltrip was seen gathering all his remaining henchmen. He then asked them all to prepare mentally because sooner or later, he would attack Dwight and his men. However, one of his henchmen disagreed, considering their gang members were dwindling. Feeling provoked by his own henchmen, Waltrip ruthlessly eliminated the person. That night, Dwight and all his members were seen gathering at Keller's nightclub, where Dwight also introduced Goody as his new member and hoped that they would all stick together and protect each other. Dwight didn't want any traitors among his members because if that happened, he would eliminate the traitor. After that, Dwight explained that their only remaining enemy was the Black Macadam gang led by Waltrip. If they managed to defeat Waltrip's group, they would become the only mafia group in control of Tulsa. The next day, Dwight asked Bodie to hack into Waltrip's laptop, which was now in the hands of the FBI. Dwight intended to seize all of his businesses whose data was on the laptop. Apparently, Bodie turned out to be skilled in hacking, and he successfully hacked into Waltrip's laptop easily. Bodie not only took Waltrip's business data but also emptied his savings, amounting to millions of dollars. Meanwhile, Waltrip, realizing that his savings had been drained, became extremely furious. On the other hand, Anna, who was still in the hospital, received a letter from Dwight asking her to check her bank balance, When she opened it, she was shocked to find that Dwight had sent her $1 million. This money was the result of hacking into Waltrip's savings, which he intentionally distributed to her, considering she would be fired from the FBI. One night, the Dwight's group was seen gathering at Keller's nightclub. Shortly after, they heard the sound of motorcycles approaching, and it turned out to be Waltrip and all his henchmen. Promptly, Dwight ordered his men to prepare, leading to a fierce battle. In the end, Dwight managed to eliminate Waltrip, and now Dwight's mafia group became the sole ruler of Tulsa, and no one would dare to disturb them anymore. A few days later, Dwight was seen playing with his grandchild at Armin's racecourse, as it turned out that Tina and her family had now settled in Tulsa with Dwight. At this moment, Tina also started calling Dwight father, after decades of not hearing that title. That night, Dwight and all his members were holding a victory party at Keller's nightclub. This party also served as the reopening of Keller's nightclub, which had been renovated by Dwight after he invested in it. After that, Dwight appeared very happy because now he had become the sole ruler or mafia king in the city of Tulsa. Not long after, he received news that there was a woman waiting for him outside. When Dwight went out, it turned out to be Anna, so he immediately invited her inside. But not long after, the police and FBI suddenly arrived and immediately arrested Dwight. Apparently, it was all Anna's doing, as she didn't want to be fired from the FBI. So Anna chose to betray by reporting all of Dwight's crimes to the FBI. After that, Dwight was arrested by the police without resistance, then put into a car. But before leaving, he managed to say to Anna that this was not the end of everything, but just the beginning, and then the movie ended. Moral lesson from the story: don't bring your dad to a fight with gangsters unless you want him to enjoy it more than you, because family bonding can lead to unintended criminal activities.